Welcome back to Geek Channel 8. I'm Eric.
And I'm Johanna.
And this week we're talking about Record of Lodoss War. But before we get into that, Johanna, what have you been up to since last we talked? Been streaming anything?
Happily, 2 episodes into the new season of Mandalorian, which is giving me a break from my marathon of Picard, which I was a little hesitant going into, as much as I love Patrick Stewart, but I just wasn't sure whether retreading back into Next Generation was a good idea at this point, since, it was a classic. I'm wondering, what are they going to add to this? But it's been great. I'm not going to give away any spoilers for people who want to go into it, but I can just say that the Borg Queen features heavily throughout the 3 seasons, and that has been a real pleasure. I recommend Picard for Star Trek fans. It is not like DS9 or Enterprise or some of the sadder series that have been in there. I haven't done too much of the other new Star Trek stuff. I watched some of Discovery, but Picard has been great.
Okay, cool. I have been watching Kunk on Earth, which, if you haven't seen it, it is a BBC mockumentary where this fictional narrator, Wilhelmina Kunk, I'm not sure the actress who plays her off the top of my head, goes through the entire history of the world, talking to college professors and museum directors and things like that. But she is profoundly stupid and knows nothing about the subject. They just dress her in tweed and she has a British accent. Therefore, she is an expert. It is great. It's on Netflix. Check it out. But this week, we're going to be talking about Record of Lodoss War. So as you know, we've been doing a series on the golden age of sword and sorcery films, the 1980s to early 90s. Basically, this is all Johanna's fault because she wanted to do something leading up to the new Dungeons and Dragons film, which, my opinion, Dungeons and Dragons on film has never been done well, or had never been done well through most of my childhood and teens. And then I hit age 20 and the Japanese managed to nail it with Record of Lodoss War. Now, we'll discuss whether or not it's good storytelling later, but as far as actually capturing the feel of Dungeons and Dragons in video form, I think Record of Lodoss War is it. It's about perfect. Let's give a little background to the year because I like to contextualize stuff so you know what was going on at the time. 1990, a lot of people think of that as the true dawn of the new millennium because it was a year where it felt like the whole world changed. There was a lot of optimism for the future. So in 1989, Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition came out. It was first published, and in Japan, Sword World tabletop role-playing game came out. And we'll talk about Sword World and where that came from a little later. In November 1989, thousands of Germans started tearing down the Berlin Wall at night, and it became symbolic of the fall of communism throughout Europe. And in 1990, in January, the doomsday clock was set back to 10 minutes till midnight, the farthest it's been since 1969. By 1991, it would go back to 17 minutes to midnight, the farthest back it's ever been. The doomsday clock is a clock used to track how close we are to nuclear Armageddon. Also, the first McDonald's opened in Russia. It closed at the end of last year, 2022, due to the Ukraine war. Also, television was changing rapidly. The Simpsons debuted as a Christmas special in 1989, but then as a regular mid-series replacement in January. Seinfeld, which had aired 5 episodes the previous summer, became a mid-season replacement. In April, Twin Peaks premiered as mid-season replacement. The Hubble telescope was launched. In May 1990, the World Health Organization removed homosexuality from its international list of diseases. In August of 1990, the Gulf War started, and the average price of a gallon of gas at the start of the year was about 93 cents. By December, it would be $1.35, and it has been uphill ever since. But there's a lot of optimism. So here's another example. In February of 1990, Nelson Mandela was released after 27 years in prison for opposing apartheid. Smoking was banned on most domestic flights in the U.S. It wouldn't be until 2000 until it was completely eliminated from all flights, but it started then. There were widespread poll tax riots in Britain in March. Also in March, 13 paintings were stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston by thieves dressed in police uniforms. The value of the paintings lost was over $500 million, making it the largest private property heist in history.
Whoa.
Yep. In August of 1990, during the first Gulf War, NBC delayed the start of The Tonight Show by 5 minutes to give their affiliates more time to cover the war. And those precious 5 minutes, they never gave back. And this is why all late night shows now start at 11:35 instead of 11:30. Yep. I threw this one in for Rosie. The World Series champions, the Cincinnati Reds, beat the Oakland A's in October. In December, the UK and France drilling teams broke through to each other, creating the channel, linking...
Wow. That was so recent. Oh my goodness. You think of it as being around forever, but 1990.
Yeah. You consider 1990 recent?
I don't know. I don't count my teens. Like, that never happened. I went straight from being a totally functional preteen who knew who she was to being a totally functional 35-year-old who knows who she is, and nothing else happened in between.
Okay. So think of all this connecting of nations that was happening, the UK with the continent and all that. And then if that wasn't enough, Christmas of 1990, Tim Berners-Lee accessed the first web page on the first web server using the first web browser, which of course he created. And then because of the nature of our show, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that a list started circulating on Usenet at this time of actresses with beautiful eyes. That list would eventually grow to become the Internet Movie Database.
Wow. I love these recaps because it's a good reminder of like what was similar at the time that the show or the movie was happening and what was different. When you mentioned the Doomsday Clock, I had to just like quick check, like, how are we doing today? And it's at 90 seconds to midnight. Apparently there's actually been a lot of coverage of this that I've missed. So thanks for the note. We are closer than ever to nuclear Armageddon, as it turns out.
They only reset it in every January, so we'll have to wait another year to find out if it goes forward or backward. Okay, so that brings us to Record of Lodoss War. There was a user group of computer users known as SNE. SNE stood for syntax error in the basic language of computer programming. And they played Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons had been released in Japan in 1986. So to celebrate its 1-year anniversary and sort of popularize it, they were evangelists for the game. They created a replay. Basically, writer Ryo Mizuno did a serialized transcription of their gaming sessions in Comptique magazine, a Japanese computer magazine. This launched a whole new genre in Japan, the replay genre, where manga, Japanese comic books, and anime would be created as replays of actual games. So if at times it seems like they were making it up as they went along, it's because they were making it up as they went along. This series of articles became very popular, and then it was condensed into what's called a light novel, which is the Japanese version of a young adult novel. That then became adapted to a manga, which is Japanese comics. That then got adapted into an anime, Japanese animation, and that eventually made it across to the US, where it was translated in English with English-speaking actors. Which brings us to our guest today, Bill Timoney. Bill Timoney was the voice of the protagonist here, Parn. Bill is from New Jersey. Some of his more well-known roles prior to this, All My Children. I had a run on All My Children. And then also after this, some well-known roles for our genre fans here on the show would be 12 Monkeys, Mission to Mars. Please welcome to the show, Bill Timoney.
Hi, guys. Hi, Eric. Hi, Johanna. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thanks for joining us, Bill.
We're glad to have you. Let's go way back before we get into the Record of Lodoss War, because everything on the show is about contextualizing stuff. Tell us a little bit about how you decided to go into the performing arts.
I was the smallest boy in my grammar school class, and I had a very pronounced stutter. So you find it easy to believe that as much as I liked athletics, I usually got my butt kicked in athletics. My dad is a good athlete, my older brother a good athlete. So I found it very, very comforting to escape into film, TV, theater later. But I live for film. My parents gave me a Super 8 camera back when they had Super 8 cameras, and I made all my little movies in the backyard and down the woods with all the neighborhood guys. I made my werewolf movies, my World War II movies, and all that stuff. Very Spielberg-esque, I guess, and was obsessed with film. And then when I was 13, my life changed because my mom dropped me and the guys off on a Saturday afternoon to a double bill of You Only Live Twice and Thunderball. Now, UA, in between Bond years, they would reissue previous Bonds on a double bill. So I'm old enough to have seen every Connery Bond on a big screen.
Wow.
My first Bond memory is the commercials for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But I also remember the commercials for the action figures. They're not dolls! The action figures for Bond and Oddjob. And Oddjob had the arm that threw the little...
Yeah.
The hat.
They're very G.I. Joe-like, I guess. And, of course, the scuba gear for the Thunderball Bond and the astronaut outfit, etc. But what made it a transformational moment, was watching those two films back to back that wonderful afternoon. We hit the moment where they're counting down the rocket. And I'm going to assume you guys are familiar with the Connery Bonds.
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, we did Dr. No on the show. Yeah.
I saw the Spectre crewman, counting down the blast off from the volcano at the climax. 3 minutes and counting. 2 minutes and counting. Very specific voice. But the other night, I had seen on the NBC Saturday Night at the Movies the greatest Pink Panther film of all, which is A Shot in the Dark. And it's the introduction of Clouseau's manservant, Cato. And who I was looking at on the big screen in You Live Twice is Cato. I didn't know the actor's name was Burt Kwouk. I was 13. But I'm looking at Burt Kwouk. And I remember seeing his first line in Shot in the Dark. Inspector Clouseau's residence, 1 moment, please. And that's not the voice I heard coming out of him. I heard 2 minutes and counting. And it fascinated me. As much as I enjoyed Bond and I enjoyed the action and all the girls, I got really fascinated by the voices. And of course, then I noticed that number 3 in Thunderball, Emil Largo, had the same voice as Tiger Tanaka in You Only Live Twice.
Yeah.
And that Kissy Suzuki in You Only Live Twice had the same voice as Nurse Patricia Fearing in Thunderball. And again, I'm only a kid, but I was like, huh? Pre-internet, pre-IMDb. It took me forever, but I figured out there was not just dubbing, which is, square peg in a round hole, one language instead of the other, but revoicing, where, yes, you loop in your own dialogue, but sometimes another actor is brought in to loop in the actor on screen's dialogue. And I stayed on that my entire career. Yeah, I grew up on the Bugs Bunny cartoons, so I worship Mel Blanc. So me and my brother and the guys were always doing voices. But when I got into this business as a career, that was something I kept, no matter what I did on camera, I kept looking for a way to get into voice. And sure enough, a person I knew who worked as an assistant at a talent agency, who I knew was involved somehow in that, because this was a secret. They pay scale. They don't pay scale plus 10, so agents don't represent it. So the only way you could find it was hitting the streets. And around 91 or so, this person, who you guys would know, because she figures very prominently later on in our story, she said, "Hey, I know these sound guys are doing this piece of garbage thing. Nobody in town wants to do it because it's disgusting." And I went, "Do I have to use my real name?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, then I'm okay with disgusting. I want to get in." And I did this thing. And sure enough, the editors and the recording guys went, "Hey, you're really good and you work really fast. We got something next week. Do you want to do?" And that's how it started. And the first thing was for Central Park Media, which was at the vanguard of importing anime. In fact, in New York, they were the game. You know, Texas had their own, LA had their own, San Francisco, Vancouver. But in New York, it was Central Park Media. And that's how I was now in with Central Park Media, and I started dubbing.
Okay, so you were a working actor before you became a working voice actor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, I started with a Shakespeare tour for 9 months around the country. And but when I was in college, I used to cut class in New Jersey and go into the city. I'd audition. I would do commercials. I would do background in movies. And I got really set with All My Children, which is the #2 rated soap at the time. And I did background, and I was established as a recurring high school student in their show's enormously popular Greg and Jenny storyline. And in fact, I had auditioned for the role of Greg. And there was another character named Tad, and I was his stand-in, and I do bit parts here and there. And then when I came back from the Shakespeare tour, they were bringing Tad back, and they asked me to audition, and I got down to producers. It became between me and the guy who got it, a guy named Michael E. Knight. But they really liked me in my audition. It was a new producer, didn't know me. And she said, "I really like that Timoney guy. We need to have, Greg's now in college at Pine Valley University, and we don't have a roommate for him yet. Let's create a role for him." So they created this, the preppy nerd of Pine Valley, Alfred Vanderpool, for me as a result of my Tad auditions. And that was my, you talk about the roles people know me for. That's still probably what I'm best known for, even though it's, way back in the rearview mirror.
Wow. Okay, so let's get to Central Park Media since we've already brought it up.
Right.
So this disgusting thing, I assume we're talking about Legend of the Overfiend?
It was recorded as original title, Orokusoi Doji. I did, I think, 2 long days on it, and I flew. And when we got done with my role, they said, "Can you do this? Can you do this?" And I am all over the first one because, they cut it into 2,
Right.
Overfiend and Demon Womb. And they really liked that I worked fast because I really took to it. I have scenes with myself. I have scenes where my character Nagumo is having a discussion with Nikki, trying to protect his girl, and Nikki's this tough, buff guy, and I'm the voice of Nikki as well. So I have whole scenes where I'm talking to myself in Overfiend. And just to put a hat on the hat, what I did in Overfiend is what Nikki Vanderzeel did with Dr. No. Now, did you talk about Nikki when you did your Dr. No?
We did not specifically go into Nikki's.
Nikki was specifically hired to revoice Ursula Andress in Dr. No. That's not Ursula Andress's voice.
We did mention that
Yes.
part, yeah.
But because she worked so well and could alter her pitch slightly, rather than them spend, because remember, Dr. No is low budget. So rather than, now they were supposed to bring in Eunice Gayson so she could record her dialogue for Sylvia Trench, right? And they just had, since they had Nikki there, they saved money by having her revoice Eunice Gayson. So Eunice Gayson is Sylvia Trench in the first 2 films, Dr. No and From Russia with Love. That's not her voice. That's Nikki Vanderzeel. Other than Money Penny and Zena Marshall, who plays Miss Taro, who brings Bond up the hill and she tries to seduce and assassinate him, and he turns the tables on her. Other than Lois Maxwell and Zena Marshall, every single speaking actress you see in Dr. No is voiced by Nikki Vanderzeel.
That's insane.
The nurse here, the secretary there. "Oh, you poor dears, we have to get you." Every single bit part if it's a female, unless it's Lois Maxwell or Zena Marshall, the voice you hear is Nikki Van Der Zeel.
Man, that takes the misogyny to like a whole new level in that film.
Well, I don't know about that because the men get revoiced all over the place in Dr. No as well by as you know, by the great Robert Rietti. Robert Rietti, who is the voice of Emil Largo in Thunderball and the voice of Tiger Tanaka in You Only Live Twice. You know, he estimated, he got the, because Rietti did it all. He would record, he would voice, he would adapt scripts, he would direct. And he estimates the big budget film Waterloo, where Rod Steiger plays Napoleon and Christopher Plummer plays Wellington. He estimated that he himself voiced 95 male roles in that film.
Wow.
Okay. All right. Well, then now I changed my mind. I'm learning a bit about film history that I did not know
Yeah,
before.
I would go. Yeah, the
It's
guys
not a gender
get
thing.
yeah, on camera guys get screwed over as much as on camera women. If you have a small bit role and you're filmed outdoors, particularly in the 60s and 70s before they could get really good sound, odds are you were re-recorded, especially if you're not in LA or New York. Like for example, in the movie The Sixth Sense, Bruce Willis gets shot in the belly and falls back on the bed while Donnie Wahlberg goes into the bathroom. And Bruce is gasping and trying to, while Olivia Williams tries to save his life. Well, you don't hear Bruce Willis in that scene. That's me.
Wow.
Huh.
I'm the voice of his groaning and gasping. Because by the time you get into post-production and you're ready to re-record that stuff, he's off on another movie, maybe in another country.
Right.
So you have somebody from the ADR group, what they call looping team, step up to the mic and do it. You ever see Hannibal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jelko Ivanek pitches Gary Oldman into the wild boar pit, and the hogs tear him to pieces while Gary Oldman is shrieking in horror. That's not Gary Oldman shrieking. That's me shrieking.
Everyone!
I feel like Groucho Marx in To Bet Your Life. Say the secret word.
You said
I said my secret word. So I got fascinated by revoicing and looping and dubbing when I was a kid. When the soap sort of went away from me in the early 90s, that's when I found my way into dubbing. Like so many people, you get your break because you're willing to do something nobody else is. I always think of Karloff in Frankenstein, how he was willing to endure all that makeup. And I also rationalize the fact that the Overfiend box said warning, absolutely not for children all over it. And I certainly rationalize the fact that I really, frankly, could not pay my rent that month.
I need to
that's
interrupt
how I
you
got it.
because some of our fans will be completely familiar with Urtsuki Doji, but not everyone. So
Don't do that to them.
I have to. I say this because I saw Johanna Googling while we were talking. Like, what is that? So I have to protect her here. I have to. All right. We've talked about.
Eric, please then. Let me answer the entire question with this simple line for everybody, and then we can move on. Because
Okay.
I consider it perhaps not quite the pinnacle, but maybe the nadir of my entire career. When in that film, you get to hear me deliver the immortal line, "A virgin, what a special treat." That's all you need to know, folks.
Okay, I'll just say, of its era, it was the most notorious hentai produced, and it was, it's where, when we talk about naughty tentacles, that's what
where it
we're referring
began.
to. Yeah,
That's where it began.
And
Probably, not that I know, but I suspect that thing probably looks like a tame PG compared to what's out there today. But back then, there midnight showings at the Angelica on Houston Street in the Village and I got my girlfriend the job as the female lead and some of my other buddies, and we all went that first Friday night at midnight, and we couldn't get a seat. We had to lie down in front. And we talked to everybody in the theater, and they were all NYU college kids. And I said, "You guys are into this?" They said, "No, we have no idea what it is." I said, "Why are you here?" They said, "Because the ad had two things. It said animated and X-rated."
Well, it's definitely those things.
But by the end of it, they were groaning as well. It was like, oh, no, come on, man.
No, but we've talked before. It also kind of has a foot in this Godzilla kaiju thing, too.
Oh,
going on.
sure, yeah.
So,
yeah.
There's a lot of really cool giant monster battles in there too.
Yes,
So,
if you could, like when Flesh Gordon came out, you guys weren't born then, but Flesh Gordon is an important film to see because at the time, pornography was made on film, as you know by watching Boogie Nights, and it was before the transition into video, and there was some ambition. Art films coming out of Europe in the 60s had mature adult content, and some of the American pornographers tried to make kind of quasi-European art films with their pornography. But a big part of the pornographic movement at that time was other film parody. And this guy came up with the idea to parody the old 1930s Flash Gordon serial is Flesh Gordon. Well, he hired a bunch of ambitious kids out of like USC and UCLA, and what they created was so surprisingly effective that they tried their best to cut out the stuff that gave it an X rating and re-release it as an R. And if you haven't seen it, it's important to see now because who did most of the special effects for Flesh Gordon? But a college kid named Dennis Muren, Muren, who becomes perhaps the most important special effects artist within the, say, Star Wars universe and those things. If you go from Willis O'Brien and Ray Harryhausen and Jim Danforth, John Steers, those guys, then boom. It's Dennis Muren has 17 Oscars or something like that? And it all starts with this odd little thing, Flesh Gordon. And if you could do that to bring this around, if you could do that with Rokudoji, where you took out the extraordinarily horrifying, misogynistic, violent rape stuff. I agree with you. There are some elements when they go with the kaiju elements that they achieve some really terrific stuff. And it really is too bad that the other stuff is in there. And I'd love to see somebody try to edit that out and restore the quote unquote good stuff to that film.
Well, maybe that's a challenge out there for someone to do an edit. We've seen edits of other movies, so maybe there'll be a fan edit of that.
Sure. What was it? They Attack of the Clones. They cut out, or Phantom Menace. They cut out Jar Jar Binks. Yeah. Let's see if you could. Yeah, see if you could do that with Overfiend. Yeah.
Okay. So enough. Let's go past that. All right. So now let's get into Lodoss in particular. So, as I said, this was, they were fans of Dungeons and Dragons. They, SNE, they also claimed that they were playing Tunnels and Trolls, which was a competitor to Dungeons and Dragons at the time, and RuneQuest. So it's kind of a mashup of a few different role-playing games. So basically this launched this kind of replay thing, which now was not popular in the West at the time, but now is. In fact, it's even gotten beyond that to like watching people play. Critical Role has built an empire off of this. And there's other playthroughs. Twitch exists to watch other people play video games. Anyway, as I said, they were sort of making it up as they go along. And if you read the original articles, they refer to them all by their character names. So even if the player is arguing with the dungeon master over something, it says Deedlit says this, and Deedlit being the breakout character, even at the very beginning. So they had like a fan poll with less than 200 people in all of Japan writing in, less than 150 maybe. So that shows you how small this was at the time. But with about 50 votes, Deedlit came out as the breakout character, and the guy that created Deedlit, Hiroshi Yamato, eventually became a science fiction writer in Japan, a well-known science fiction writer in his own right. Anyway, they're making this up as they go along. They're literally, so I understand. So for Johanna and Rosie, and Bill, if the plot seems difficult to follow when you jump into this, it's because it assumes you know the 4 years of history leading up to this before this starts. So let's talk about that. So you get these scripts. Do you know what's going on?
No, you're asking me? No.
Yeah.
Now, I did not adapt the scripts to Lodoss. Lodoss is is a big change for me because prior to that, I had partnered up with Sandra, who had the one who made Orochi Doji happen for me. And you guys know her because she's no longer with us, but late in her career, she became very castable as like the perfect New York City old Jewish lady. And she is everywhere. My favorite one of hers is in the Spider-Man where Tom Holland tries to stop a guy from breaking into a car in an alley, but it's his car.
Yeah.
And he's all inept about it. People start hanging out of their windows talking. And Stan Lee is one of them. Mm-hmm. Well, Sandra is the woman who hangs out, does most of the talking to him, and then Stan is out, and she sees him, and he goes, Marjorie, how's you? And they start talking. Well, that's Sandra James. Sandra James had a wonderful career late in her life, but prior to that, she was coordinating voice talent for ADR groups, and she used me a lot. And I pitched her after this whole Roksuki Doshi thing. I said, this company, CPM, let's get in there with them. And she really didn't have anything to do with it. So she went, well, we'll use my banner, which was Speakeasy. She said, but you do it all. So we cast a lot of the dubs for CPM in those early days. The titles I can remember off the top of my head, Here is Greenwood, Battle Skipper, My, which was a favorite of mine. And we would, we didn't make the decision who got to get the job, but we made the decision of who got to be heard. So there were auditions. And we would put ourselves in the auditions, and we would usually get cast. So when they went to hire us for Lodoss War, they said to Sandra, not Bill. We've heard Bill a lot. Let's find somebody else. So I wasn't going to get cast in Lodoss War, and I knew that Lodoss War was going to be a lot of episodes, and that the hero was going to be a really cool role. So Sandra said, well, let's just lie. So I worked in my upper register on my audition, and instead of putting my name Bill Timoney on the audition when we submitted it to Central Park Media, we just put in number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so they never knew the names. But the name that I made up was Billy Regan. And they said, who's this Billy Regan kid? He's great. So they hired me for Parn, not knowing that I was the guy they said, we don't want to hear him in this.
Right.
And
Nice.
then I kept up this charade of having this alter ego named Billy Regan, to the point where I like him so much because he works so much in dubbing that I use his name a lot. He's in a lot of anime. I don't want to use my own name. Like when I do Pokemon even, I want it to be Billy Regan's job and not my own job.
So I wanted to throw this in here because we've actually heard we've heard Billy Regan on the show before. If you guys remember when we were doing Cowboy Bebop, there were scenes where Jet was on a stakeout with his partner. Whenever there was that flashback to Jet's story, they would be listening to baseball on the radio. And the baseball announcer is Billy Regan.
Yep. Yep. And the director of that one was Mary. Oops, I'm going to blank on her last name. She's in everything. If you know the Silent Hill game, that haunting female saw just that voice going, that's Mary. Why am I going blank on Mary's name? Because she's in everything. She's married to the guy from who's one of the great voice actors in L.A. who does the World Police, the Team America World Police. He's the guy. God. He's the guy who goes, Gary, use your acting. Yeah, I can't believe I'm going blank on their names. I'm sorry. But yeah, so anyway, when we get the scripts, the guy who CPM hired to adapt the scripts and produce the dub, Michael Albin, the great Michael Albin, they got them one by one. And I've since directed scores and adapted scores of dubbings. And when they're a series, you only get what's in front of you. They never give you, in 20 episodes, this is going to be that. Which was tricky for us because there were no dubbers in New York, really, when we started. So I would bring in actors from a theater company I was a part of called MCC, and I'd train them. I'd have them do bits and walla and background voices so they could get the process. But sometimes I would put somebody in a small role, and 6 episodes later, that role became a hugely important role. And they may or may not have been ready for it. We had that happen on a show called Iria, Zayram the Animation, which was a disaster for us. That one of the producers wanted a buddy of his to get a part, and we gave him a tiny part. And the guy was a friend of the producer. He really wasn't an actor. And then the thing came back, and now that guy is a big role. and it took us twice, 3 times as long to record them. And as you know, in these things, these were very low budget. So you needed people, yes, to work well, but they needed to work fast.
Right.
And a slow A plus would always lose the job to a fast B minus.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like the world of comic books too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Completely.
So, what went into what thought processes and what went into to voicing Parn? What did you think about when you were coming up with Parn's voice?
Well, I know I had to keep him in Billy Riggins' upper register because at the time I didn't want them to find out that it was me doing it. So when he got eager about something, it was always up there, as opposed to always being up there, or down there. Although it was fun when we did Chronicles of the Heroic Knight many years later, and we flash forward to an older Parn. It was fun to work with him in my regular, at the time I must have been in my 40s or maybe my late 30s, and I was able to work with him here. But he also didn't, because he now had knowledge and he had experience, he could afford to conserve his energy. Whereas the young Parn, everything about the young Parn is high energy. Come on, we got to go. Let's do this now. Who's that? Is that Deedlit? That kind of thing. So it was fun to have Billy dwell up in there as Parn.
Yeah, Parn in the transcription of the original Dungeons and Dragons game is very much like that. He's very eager. He's always the first one to charge in. Has no interest in Deedlit. He's actually interested in the princess because he wants to become a king, so he wants to marry the princess. So the Deedlit story comes along later. We should mention Deedlit is the elf. So if Will was here, we would talk about the Beckme edition. So this is in the US, this was released as the beginners and expert set that came out in around 1983. Like I said, didn't make it to Japan until 1986. This had a whole different way of doing Dungeons and Dragons where it sort of mixed classes and races. So you had a standard party. If you had everybody, you would have a fighter, that was Parn. You'd have a magic user, that was Slain. You would have a cleric, that was Ito. You would have an elf, that was Deedlit. You would have a dwarf, that was Geem. And you would have a thief, which now they call a rogue because thief is not, not politically correct enough for the company. So it's that was Woodchuck.
Woodchuck.
Yeah, and I think that's everyone. If I've got the entire cast in mind. By the way, guys, this is mostly for Johanna and Rosie. Does Geem strike any bells for you guys?
Yeah, the first couple times I heard the name, I'm like, wait, are they just like blatantly stealing this name from Gimli? Like, what are they doing here?
It is an homage to Gimli from Lord of the Rings. That's why he's called Geem. Yeah. But as I said earlier, Deedlit becomes the breakout character. I don't know about you guys. I find her a little annoying, especially here. She's such a popular character, though, that as late as 2021, there was a Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth video game that came out. So Deedlit is still like the breakout character here. But what I gotta say is, if you guys, are you with me, Deedlit? What did you guys like her? What was your take on her?
I thought that she tried to get Parn's attention a little too much in the beginning. But I don't know. I did like her character development. As she went through the show, she became older and wiser, and not so much trying to get Parn's attention, but just more, down to business. And in the end, I mean, he saves her life, and it looks like they're together. But that was one thing that I was telling my kids when I was watching the series is, the intro. And then the song that they played, rolling the credits, I'm like, this isn't a love story between them, but the song, she's totally pining for him. And it didn't really make any sense at all until the end, after he literally saved her life. But
all right,
yeah,
I
like her.
The reason I bring this up is because I might subject you guys to slayers. So Slayers was another anime from this time. And the main character, if you think of kind of the way Woodchuck is in this and Shiris the mercenary, except if they were one character and that character was a sorceress, but had the personality of a petulant child and was also voiced by Lisa Ortiz, who does the voice of Deedlit in this, that's Slayers. And Slayers among Dungeons and Dragons fans is considered the warning. Like, Record of Lodoss War, they say, is Dungeons and Dragons the way the Dungeon Master believes his campaign is going to go. And Slayers is the way it actually always ends up going with crazy murder hobos and stuff like that. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because we'll probably end up doing Slayers at some point in the future. All right,
well,
back to...
just as a comment, I mean, I went into this sort of expecting Parn's character to be the least interesting one, sort of where everyone else is a foil to him, but a more interesting foil, and it didn't turn out that way. And it was something I was very invested in his, restoring his honor and like figuring out his relationship with his father. And it gave the series some direction, which helped a lot because the plot was difficult to follow. It was like hard to tell, like, are these bad guys aligned with each other or not? And why not? But now they're kind of working together here, and that was difficult, but I had a strong sense of at least like what Parn's motivation was. And so, Bill, I wanted to ask you, like, you wanted to play the hero character, even though often that Luke Skywalker archetype is not necessarily the most interesting one in the universe, but you made it interesting. Like, how did you go about like trying to make that character not make that high energy feel like something that was interesting and not something that was typical for that archetype?
At the end of the day, an actor, like anybody who is creating content, a writer, a director, or a designer, a musician, everybody has only two things specific to their art and craft, and that is their own taste and judgment. And yeah, I wanted Parn for, as you say, mercenary means. It seemed like he'd have the largest queue count, which meant I would have the most hours and I'd get paid. Which was tricky because, again, it was my thing to be very, very fast. I really prided myself not only doing one take, but I like to do what they call chase it, where I don't rehearse, I don't preview the clip. I glance at the line, and then we run it and we record the rehearsal. That's called chasing. And so as I see him organically, I'm reacting. So I'm relying on my taste and my judgment to stay away from the word you used, or what you meant to say was cliche.
Yeah.
Because so many moments can be so stereotypical. How do you make it fresh, especially when it's already drawn? Mm-hmm. I can't go, do I whisper this line or scream it? Well, if he's drawn like this, I can't whisper it. But vocally, I want to find nuance in a way that is effective immediately. So I just want to react because, again, one take wonder. I want to react organically, staying within what I do, as opposed to doing what I think the audience expects. Because then I go into what the audience has already seen, has already heard. And, the essence of good storytelling or good story consuming is give me something new. I don't want the same old, same old. I want something new. And that's what I tried to bring to the character throughout my performance.
At some point, you took over directing the voice actors.
Almost immediately. The guy named Dave Siegel, a wonderful guy who worked at National, which is where we did the recording. And National's not there anymore, but you could see it at the end of Tootsie. It's where their fictional soap opera Southwest General is taped. And at the end, when she comes out, signing autographs, and there he is, it's right there, and you see the National banner and all that. That's where we recorded. Dave worked for National, and he was assigned Record of Lodoss War to take care of the client CPM and our Michael Albin. But about 2 days into recording, he was called off. National needed him to finish up something else he'd been doing. And Michael trusted me enough, because he was producing and adapting. He wasn't directing. He asked me to take over the directing. So I did the first, after that, like second or third day, I did the first half of the episodes. And what is it? Is it an 11 episode run?
13.
It's 13? All right, so I did the first like 6 or 7, and then Dave wrapped up what he had been doing, and he did the rest. Now, unfortunately, the first thing they did was the credits. So I'm not listed in there as the credits. Dave is listed as the only audio director, but I did the first half of that show. And of course, when we came to hearing Parn's father, is it Tessius? I cast my brother. And Carla the Grey Witch is voiced by his wife, my sister-in-law Simone, who I thought did she did a fantastic. Again, I didn't have the power to do that. I'd bring in people, but for the small parts like Tessius, I did have the power to just bring somebody in, and that's how I was able to get those guys work. Mm-hmm. You know, we're actors in the '90s in New York. We're freelancers, and work is work. And if it was really cool, like Record of Lodoss War, then all the better.
And did you tell him, you got to get this in one take or you're out of here?
I would always encourage my people I would bring them in. I'd have them watch me. I'd have them do the what we call walla, you know, all the soldiers fighting, all the villagers screaming. That's called walla, where it's just a walla bed. You're not necessarily matching flap or synchronizing. Mm-hmm. But you get in the booth, you put on the cans, you get the beeps, and you get to learn that style of acting. And then when I thought certain people were, I always did it with the intention of working these people up into bigger roles.
Matching flap, by the way, is matching the lip movement.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Syncing. Yeah. Do you watch the dub? I'm sorry, Roosevelt. I need to know.
Yeah.
So you are familiar with our
the Central
performances.
Park Media. I have the Central Park double disc box set, and you know it's one of my prized DVDs. Yeah.
Rosie, what were you going to ask?
I was just going to say, so basically you're like, we're going to do the one take wonder, and it's a family tradition, so you have to do it too.
Yeah, and my brother Mike, he ended up doing a lot. When we moved on some years later, I was in LA when I moved back, and I got married like early 2001, 2002, and I reached out to a buddy of mine named Joe DeGiorgi up at Headline in Irvington, New York, and he was now doing all the dubs for Media Blasters. And that's where we did Chronicles of the Heroic Knight. And that's where we did so many other titles. And I called him one day and said, hey, I'm back from L.A. and I'm looking for work. And he said, are you kidding me? I said, what? He goes, half hour ago, Crispin Freeman called me to tell me he was moving to L.A. and he wasn't going to be able to direct my dub of Gokudo Swordsman Extraordinaire, which is my baby. Gokudo Extraordinaire that's what I want leading off my obituary, is my work as a script adapter and dubbing director and voice actor on the Gokudo films, because I cherish what we did on that.
Well, if we do Gokudo, we'll have you back.
Please.
We'll have you back to talk about it.
I'll give you let me tease it then.
Okay.
The key with Gokudo was that Media Blasters stopped paying us. Now, they were notorious for being very, very late in their payments. But in this, they just weren't paying. Well, Joe, the great, wise, and wonderful Joe DeGiorgi, producing this dub, loved Gokudo so much, it's so hilarious, that he kept going. And he paid all of us out of his own pocket.
Wow,
to keep it
that
going.
never happens.
Never happens. And what was the twist? The twist was, because they were very happy that we kept sending them the dubbed content without demanding them, like, we're not going to do this anymore until you pay everything you owe us. They kept their mouths shut. They never bothered us, which they would normally do by saying, we need to see your script adaptation. So they never approved my script adaptations. So on Gokudo, I ran hog wild. There's a scene where they walk past this tree, and she's very nasty to him. You know, it's kind of a parody of Slayers. And she opens up her trunk, and they have to go down into the. But she and Gokudo were kind of going at it. They're snippy. So as Gokudo goes down, we only see the back of his head, which to me, I can go hog wild because you don't see flap. So if somebody doesn't talk, I can give them lines. So as Gokudo walks into her trunk, based on how they've been antagonists to each other, I have Gokudo say, your roots are showing. I went as Warner Brothers, Merry Melodies, Chuck Jones as I could on that show, and they didn't stop me. So I would love to come back when you guys do Gokudo. There was a wonderful guy who wrote for something called Revolution SF, a reporter, a journalist named Kevin, and he actually drove from Georgia to New York State to witness some of our recording sessions. And he wrote in his review, "This is the first time I've said this. Don't watch it subtitled. You have to watch the dub."
You have to watch the dub.
So I'll be back. I'll be back.
All right. So
Awesome.
before we let you go here, I have to say that when I was young playing Dungeons and Dragons, my parents, of course, hated it. It was during the Satanic Panic. There was a TV movie with Tom Hanks called Mazes and Monsters about a guy who plays it, goes insane, ends up in an institution. They were convinced that in my 50s, which by the way, I was playing Dungeons and Dragons yesterday. I'm the dungeon master still to this day. And they were worried about this, which all of this, I think you know where this is going. We got to talk about initiative.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's a buddy of mine named Bob Sankiewicz, who I've done theater with here in New Jersey, who is long time. I think he's been 40 years as the dungeon master. And Bob's best pal is Brian O'Halloran, who plays Dante in the Clerks series. You know, you mentioned I'm from New Jersey. Right now, I live on the northern tip of the Jersey Shore. I live in the town where Kevin Smith films his Clerks movies. In fact, I worked on Clerks 3. Brian asked me to take a job on it, and I took the job because I could walk to work. The Clerks store is 4 blocks from our house. And Bob wrote this thing about 4 guys playing a Dungeons and Dragons game, and Brian O said he would play one of the roles. I said I'd play one of the roles, and Bob plays one. Bob wrote the part for him as a sort of a showcase for himself. And the 4th guy is a buddy of his who he's been in his Dungeons game team cult. I don't know, whatever word you want. So it's the 4 of us, but that's only half of it. The other half is a guy in a straitjacket in a cell, and a doctor and 2 orderlies. And it's the exact 4 same actors.
Nice.
And as you watch this film, you, the viewer, must decide which of the 2 contexts is the reality. Is the dungeon master in his mind doing this thing where he's in a straitjacket with these other guys? Or is he really a guy in a straitjacket and his fantasy is that he's playing a Dungeons and Dragons game with them? It's a fun idea. Talented guy named Grayson Berry directed it. It's just being submitted to film festivals now. Now, Kevin runs a film festival here in Atlantic Highlands. It's called Smod Castle in November. He just started it. And I would say that, I find it easy to believe that this will be at Smod Castle, but hopefully it'll be in lots of other film festivals before that. It's called Initiative, and you can find it when you look for photos of girls with pretty eyes. Oh, I'm sorry, on imdb.com.
Great. Okay, well, I want to thank Bill Timoney, voice of Parn, a.k.a. Billy Regan, for being here today, joining us and helping us see the other side of Record of Lodoss War. And we'll have him back at some point, hopefully.
I'd be delighted. Thank you guys so much. It's so great to talk to you all.
This was awesome.
I want to remind everyone, if you want to reach us, you can at GC8 Podcast. That's letter G, letter C, number 8 podcast at gmail.com. If you like the podcast, just tell one other person about the podcast. But until next time, this is Eric.
This is Johanna.
This is Rosie.
Signing off.